Hi guys, it's Rory here and welcome to the Football Heritage Podcast. Hope you're enjoying everything that our fantastic podcast has to offer so far this year. Firstly, I'm here to tell you that our brand new patron exclusive feed, the Football Heritage Extra, is now live. You can subscribe for £3 per month and that gives you access to an additional exclusive podcast every Thursday. We've designed our patron exclusive content to be a wee bit more casual, more niche and full of exclusive insights and interviews with our friends, contributors and other people working within football. Links to subscribe are in all of our episodes, show notes as always. Looking forward to seeing you over there. Secondly, if you enjoyed last week's show, it would mean the world to us if you could leave a review on Apple and Spotify, or if you're listening on YouTube, a comment and a like. It really helps the algorithm pick us up and does so much for pushing us in front of new listeners every week. Please remember as well to leave a comment on our episodes on whichever platform you're listening on. One of our favourite things is engaging with you guys and being able to speak with you about the conversations that we're having every week. Lastly, please remember to visit our website to read our articles and see what other projects we're working on at the moment. Or if you like, come and join us on our social media for daily posts and content related to the heritage of football across the world. We're always up for a chat, so if you have any questions, suggestions or feedback, feel free to DM us on any of our socials or email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. I think that's about everything that I need to plug at the moment. Thanks once again for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host Rory Bryce and today I'm joined once again by Steven Torres.
How are you?
I'm good, Stephen. How's things with you?
Taking it day by day. Fantastic.
Excellent. And I'm also joined on this occasion by Rodrigo Arias.
Glad to be with you guys.
Glad to have you here as well, Rodrigo. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we are going to be talking about the origins, history and heritage of CD Águila, one of El Salvador's most successful football clubs. It's an episode I'm really excited for. It's the first time we've done anything on football in El Salvador in this project before. Not even in the website have we covered any football in El Salvador. So I'm delighted to be here speaking about one of their most successful football clubs with two of the people who know the club most well. Obviously, a lot of our long-time listeners will be well acquainted with Steven Torres now. He's the current president of ANCCIF, our partner organisation, proud partner organisation, and he's otherwise a media and communications expert. I've done his introduction on this show about 6 or 7 times now, so if you're not up to speed with who Steven Torres is, please do go and listen to the other episodes we have him on. But Rodrigo Arias is new to the show. He is a native of El Salvador and graduated with a degree in journalism from UCA University and began working in journalism in 1999. He has worked on numerous television shows for which he has also won awards as well. So Rodrigo, please tell myself and our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I've been covering football since the 1990s, but I've been a passionate fan for all my life. So even when I was not working as a journalist, I always was watching games and reading and writing stories about it. And I'm really passionate about not only football in the world, I mean, national teams World Cup, but also Central America football, which is not very known around the world, but CONCACAF football is really many great stories, and I think most of them are not known, but I think we are here to let the world know about them.
Yes, I completely agree, and that's what Steven Torres has been helping us with specifically since we started this fantastic partnership with ANCCIF. As I've said numerous times before, here in the UK and in Europe, CONCACAF is a little bit of a forgotten region. You know, not a lot of people will know the stories of even just national teams or the football clubs here, but some of the really in-depth football histories of the clubs that have come from CONCACAF, their journeys, their stories, that's what we really want to be speaking about today on this show. And I know that must sound a bit strange. You know, if anyone from El Salvador is listening to this, they might be thinking, well, CD Águila are one of our most successful and most prominent football clubs. But over here, as is much the case with many nations in CONCACAF, many club football sides in CONCACAF, a lot of people don't know the stories and they might actually look down on a lot of the clubs there as you know, being from leagues that aren't worthy of our time, wouldn't match up in a European context. But that's why we tell these stories, is to tell them completely different and to shine a light on some of the best stories from the CONCACAF region and some of the best club stories as well. So CD Águila were founded in 1926 and really rose to prominence very, very quickly. They've got a very storied history, and Steven's role today is really to tell us about the club in the context of their CONCACAF Champions Cup runs as well. Just before we jump straight into talking about CD Águila, Steven, tell us a little bit about the context of the club and the context of football in El Salvador.
I can, speak from a certain standpoint, but mostly Rodrigo will get into in-depth details about the club and the history, of course. I can only speak on behalf of what I've seen, obviously, from the Champions Cup. Going back to what you said earlier, he and I collaborated on a great historical piece. A couple of years ago, we did a little bit of an update, and with Rodrigo's permission, it was one of our first postings on our new website of ANCCIF.org, both in English and in Spanish. And of course, 50 years ago, Club Deportivo Águila captures its first international title. And it got into, a good in-depth, analysis of the final, which I remember, and I think I may have spoken to you beforehand about it on another podcast, was that when I got to CONCACAF, the final of the 1976 Champions Cup, CONCACAF Champions Cup, which was won by Águila, but it was played in early 77. The CONCACAF records only had one game from the two games that was in their archives. And that's with the help of Rodrigo. We were able to piece that together, and with his help, I was able to correct what many years the CONCACAF archives before I got there had only a 5-1 final against SV Robin Hood of Suriname. But there were two games that were played. And, Rodrigo did play a good part in helping me, piece that together and correct it so that moving forward, it was known, even though that Águila did win the series. But, the second game, I'm sure Rodrigo will go into in-depth details of it, was a thriller that ended in overtime. Back then, there wasn't any golden goal or, aggregate scores. Many of the times, the tournaments, they had to play extra games in other series. I know that this series is just on Águilas, but I'm sure that there have been other tournaments where there were additional games that were played in a final. So, having said that, it was a great piece. I do commend Rodrigo for helping me put it back online, and it's clear and visible on our website. And I would strongly urge anybody to go see it. There is a couple of photos from that final against SV Robin Hood, thanks to Rodrigo and his connections with his current connections with El Gráfico in El Salvador, that were able to give us the permissions to publicly put these two action images, which are great images from those two game series.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I would urge any of our listeners to go and check out that piece as well. We'll put links to it in the show notes for this episode, as we always do. So, Rodrigo, obviously, these stories and the wider work of ANCCIF is something that you obviously hold quite dear to you. What is it about the story of Águila that is so attractive to you?
Well, the whole 1970s were like El Salvador's football's golden age, because from 1967 to 1980, three El Salvador clubs won the CONCACAF Championship. Alianza 68, Águila 77, and FAS 79. Plus, in 75, Platense won the Centroamerican Cup. But we were also very good in national teams. Our team qualified for the 1970 World Cup, 1982 World Cup. And we saw many of the best footballers in history during that period of time. Mágico González started playing in 76. 77, and Norberto Hueso, who was our greatest midfielder, was in that era too. So there's a lot of great stories about that age, 1970. So Águila, one of the best teams of that time, the only one who played in two finals. They played in 1973 Central American final, 1977 CONCACAF final, which they won. But also the colorful of their characters. Not only players, they had characters. Most of them were marked by conflicts. El Salvador was in a war in 1969, which is widely known as the Football War.
That's right.
And the defensive right back was Mario Castillo. He was a soldier during that war. There was a lot of other people who was affected by the civil war, who was between 1979 and 92. And two of them were killed, two of the players, and others had family members who were lost or they were involved in the war. So there's a lot of stories around that team. Águila is also from the western part of El Salvador. West El Salvador is very particular. The personalities of East El Salvador maybe are more pragmatic people. I think West El Salvador are most rural, but also family oriented. They're loyal. They're very proud. And Águila is part of their most proud symbols. Águila is a symbol of Western El Salvador. El Salvador is also a nation of immigrants. Most of Salvadorians go to the United States. I live in the United States for many years, and most of the immigrants are from Western El Salvador. So when you go to a El Salvador restaurant in the United States, they only talk about Águila. Águila is like, so it's a common topic. You go to your job on Monday, and how was Águila? And who's the coach? And who's the new star of Águila? So Águila is a symbol of big portion of Salvadorians who love football.
I think that's when you know that your football club has become more than just a sports team and more of an institution, when an entire demographic and group of people believe that this football club is their representative and is so entrenched within their identity and their heritage. You know, that's what makes it special. Really, really fascinating. So, you know, has it always been the case that Águila has been the representative of people from Western El Salvador? What was it like in the beginning for the club? Where did they originate from?
Well, the football started to be played in East El Salvador, in two cities, San Salvador, the capital, and Santa Ana. Santa Ana was a rich city. We are a coffee nation, so there's a lot of coffee plantations, and of course, coffee moguls and millionaires in Santa Ana. So they had their own football club, which is called FAS. FAS is a great team. But in Western El Salvador was not much national team players came from there in the early 20th century. Águila was formed as a social club, not as a football club. Social club, of course, they had basketball teams or baseball teams or football teams, but they were not competitive. So the first team in San Miguel in Western El Salvador who really represented them was Dragón. Dragón, which means dragon. They had a lot of success in the 1950s, early 50s. They had also a great player, and I think this player maybe have changed the history of El Salvador football. His name was Juan Francisco Barraza. He was a striker, known because he had a ferocious left foot. He made a lot of goals from all angles, but he was a very nice football player. And he maybe was the first star from Western El Salvador. So I think Western El Salvador, they think, okay, we're not, the East El Salvador had all the national team players and all the stars, and they felt like they were looked down a little bit. When Barraza came, he came in with Dragón in the early 50s. And 1954 was a big year in El Salvador because it was the first time that a national team won anything really, really big. 1954 were the Central American and Caribbean Games. It's like a big regional sporting event.
Sure.
And they had a football tournament. So it was in Mexico, in the UNAM Stadium, Pumas UNAM Stadium, 1954. So El Salvador came not as a favorites, and they won the tournament. They won by beating Mexico 2-3 in Mexico. This first and only time El Salvador had beaten Mexico there. The star was Barraza, this Western Salvadorian who nobody really knew much about, and he came to the tournament. He was the best player, and in the final game against Panama, when we have to won the gold medal. We won because of a free kick from Barraza, a ferocious left foot. So Barraza became our national hero. So Barraza was the first footballer from West El Salvador who was a real national star. So, now the West El Salvador they had a star. And but Dragón was a little team. They didn't have the resources to make it really, really big. So Águila, okay, now we're going to take over. Now we're going to form a really competitive team. And they signed Barraza because they have more money. And then Águila started to recruit players from all West El Salvador. And they, in 1959, they won the promotion to the first league because we were in the second division. And they took the first league by storm in 1959. They won their first 2 championships in the first division. They won 59 and 60. And then they won again in 63 and 64. There were 4 championships in the first 5 national league tournaments. And Barraza was the star. So now Barraza is the best player of El Salvador. Águila has the best player, and they win championships. So they became the symbol of West El Salvador. Everybody loved them. They were also very normal people. They were amateurs. They were not rich footballers at that time. They were common people. I think everybody loved them. Águila became really loved all over the country. Then in the 70s, when they became internationally successful, they were already maybe the most popular team in El Salvador. I think they still are very popular. They're now competing in popularity with Alianza and FAS, but in the 70s, everybody loved Águila.
One of those clubs that kind of comes from nowhere, seemingly out of the blue, and then starts taking over. And I guess that's why people like aligning themselves to them. It's like you said, everyone loves an underdog story, and there is an element of that, but I know there's, they had more money, so they were able to buy great players, but there is an element of there being an underdog story, but there's also an element of the players being relatable in this case, and that's important too, because people identify with football squads and teams who are relatable, who they can see out in the streets, who they might have seen down at their local shop or down at the local bar or something like that. People love stories like that, and they love feeling that they're a part of that story as well. But, ultimately this club represents historically and now Western El Salvador. So I'm presuming that the majority of its fan base come from these rural areas. The supporters are hardworking people, and they very much see their heritage as being within these kind of agrarian communities, rural communities, farming communities, with the club as their escape at the end of the week where they can go and celebrate and express themselves.
Yeah. I mean, El Salvador is a football nation since the 50s. I think we were also in the 20s and 30s a football nation, but the 54 national team changed that. We were a football nation, but not as passionate. When 54 happened, and we beat the Mexicans in Mexico, and Barraza was the hero, then we became a very strong football, passionate nation. We went crazy about football, crazy about Barraza and Águila and all that. And there's also another element with Águila, which I don't want to overlook. In the 60s, who were the best players in the world? They were the Brazilians. In the 60s, the Brazilian clubs, they were making world tours, like great rock and roll bands. And in 64 was a big year because here came Flamengo, I think Botafogo, came Palmeiras, and they carried the world champion. Vavá, the great goal scorer, was from Palmeiras. Jalma Santos. In Sao Paulo was Bellini. In Botafogo was Garrincha. Pelé came in 66 with Santos. And there was a big event in 64 with Barraza. I don't know if that was an honest thing or a promotional story. But Sao Paulo came to El Salvador. And they play against Slovan Bratislava from Czechoslovakia. And they play a lot of players who played the 62 final, including Josef Masopust, a friendly in San Salvador, which is unheard of. But Sao Paulo made a very strange thing. They said they want to hire Barraza. They want to hire Juan Francisco Barraza because he was great. And they took him. They took him in the tour in Mexico. And they came back. And Barraza played in a friendly with a Sao Paulo shirt against Águila.
That's incredible.
Everybody went crazy. Okay, Barraza is going to play in Sao Paulo. Barraza is going to play with the world champions. Okay, we have a world-class player here. But the thing is that after the tour and they filled the stadiums, they didn't hire Barraza.
Sent him back.
Yeah, but after that, Barraza, the official story interviews said that Barraza didn't want to leave his mother because he was His mother was single mother, and he didn't want to leave her. It's sentimental reasons, whatever it was. But the thing was that when he wore the Sao Paulo shirt in San Salvador, it was great. And then after that, most people fell in love with Brazilian football, and Águila started to hire Brazilian players. Águila became like the Brazilian team in El Salvador, and they started to hire many players, maybe some unknown players. And in '68 was the other great year, because Sosimo, the central defender of the '62 Brazil World Championship team, he played for Águila. He signed for Águila for 1 year. So the first World Cup winner who played in a Central American league was Sosimo in 1968 with Águila. And he became a player coach, because he was player and coach of Águila. Players who play with him always talk very fondly about him, that he was a great person, he was very dedicated, and he taught them a lot of football culture. So Águila became like a Brazilian team, and then in '69, they signed a great Brazilian player called Pinho. And Pinho was the best player of the El Salvador League in the 1970s. And he was the leader of Águila. He was the best player in Águila, and maybe one of the reasons they won the 1977 CONCACAF Championship Cup.
That's incredible. Obviously, a club with massive pedigree and massive pool to be able to get those kinds of players on board. Obviously, a massive club within the region to have that kind of pool, to bring Brazilian players to them. Massive pedigree that goes along with the name, and obviously made a name for themselves for their international exploits and the success they were having, the way that they were performing. I mean, in terms of what Águila had done for football in El Salvador, how would you describe that, Rodrigo? Was this golden team really the club that kick-started the golden era of football in El Salvador?
No, I think the team that started the golden era was Alianza, because Alianza hired in '65 a Chilean coach whose name was Hernán Carrasco. He was an assistant of Fernando Riera in the 1962 Chile national team. The Chile national team was third place in the '62 World Cup. So Chile was one of the best teams in the world at that time. So one of the assistant coaches came here, and he first coached a youth team and then Alianza. And Alianza really changed the positioning game. They became more, their football IQ was improved, and they won the 67-68 CONCACAF Championship Cup. And after that, Alianza had a great success. Then Águila followed. And Águila, when they signed Pinho in '69, then they had the foundations to build a great team.
Yeah, understood. And you obviously alluded to this earlier on, but of course, like many other football clubs, football fans and football players, Águila were also caught up in the so-called soccer war, or the football war, which took place with Honduras in 1969 as well.
Yeah, the '69, that was a really unfortunate event. The football war was, there was tensions between Honduras and El Salvador, who were more economic dispute about land, but was really between a political story. But it got mixed up in '69 because in June 1969, there was these two games between El Salvador and Honduras to qualify for the 1970 World Cup. And the war started 1 month later in July. So, they went to war because those three football games, which is a lie. The tornado of the war had been formed for many years in the 1960s. So it exploded in 2 months, but it has nothing to do with football. We're not that kind of people who will start a war because of a football game. That's a lie. A Polish journalist invented that story, Richard Kapuczynski. Great storyteller, but he was not the most truthful journalist. But football was mixed up, and there were some players who were involved, most notably Mario Castillo, the right defender from Águila. He was a soldier. He was in the reserves, so he never saw action, but he was still very young during the war. But he was in the army. And after that, he started to play with Águila in the 70s, and and became a great player. He went to the World Cup in 1982. His nickname was Macora Castillo. Everyone knows him as Macora Castillo. He's still a great person. I love to talk to him. He's a great guy, and he loves to tell stories about it. Unfortunately for him, also, his brother became also involved in a conflict, in the civil war in El Salvador from 79 to 92. And Macora had a brother who joined one of the guerrillas in El Salvador, and he was killed during the war, which is unfortunate. But it reminds us that generation was touched by those times. There were crazy times, Cold War in all over the world, and in countries like El Salvador, a Cold War meant real action and real violence and real suffering. Two of the best players of that Águila team suffered because of that. One of them was Cisco Diaz. Cisco Diaz was the central striker, their goal scorer, charismatic, quick, and very popular in San Miguel. He should not have been Águila's great striker in the 70s. Águila had another great striker who was called Ramon Martinez. He was star in 68 championship. He was the star during the 1969 qualification. He did the main goals of the civil war, of the soccer war in 69 against Honduras was from Mon Martinez, who is from San Miguel. He was supposed to be Águila's great number 9 in all their history. But after the 70 World Cup, he felt they didn't give them the credit that he deserves, and he had, I don't know, a lot of misunderstandings between him and the federations and Águila's board. So he left Águila in 71. He went to another team. So he never played for Águila again. And then came Cisco Diaz, Ismael Diaz, a great striker. He had a long mustache. He looked like Rivellino. And so, yeah, he was really popular. He scored one of the goals against Robin Hood in the 77 final. But sadly, in the early 1980s, he was shot during the war in a very strange circumstances. Nobody really knew what happened. During the war, you could be in a crossfire and you don't have anything to blame, but you were unfortunate to be in the wrong place on the wrong time. And that what happened with Cisco Diaz. We lost him early in the 80s, and that was a tragedy. And the other one who lost his life was Saturnino Osorio. Saturnino Osorio was a defender, great defender. And we call him Ninon Osorio. Ninon is the short for Saturnino. So Ninon Osorio played in the 70 World Cup. He played during the soccer war in the 69. He was a defender during the great years of Águila, the golden age of Águila. He was cousin of Zapata. He's cousin of Luis Baltasar Ramirez Zapata, who was the other great player in El Salvador. And he had a famous journalist, was his brother, Carlos Alberto Osorio. And tragically, in 1980, he was shot during the war. We knew what happened. One of the guerrillas, of the commandos, told him to stop, but it was during the rain. And he maybe he didn't hear, and they shot him for no reason. It's a very unnecessary death from Ninon Osorio. But it tells you that this team, and though El Salvador in those times, we lived during very difficult times, and that I think that made them most significant for us. During the war, football was a great way to escape from all that chaos, from that madness. I remember, because I live in those years, during the football games, maybe during the national team, during the finals, we all forgot about that we were at the war and that we were fighting each other. Football was it's a healing pastime. We were united because of football. Football games were like a truce in the middle of the war. Mario Castillo, Macora, who fought in the 69 soccer war, said that his brother was a guerrilla. So he was in the mountains. He was in the mountains hiding during the conflict. And during early 80s, when he played with the national team, somebody told him, hey, outside the dressing room, there's your brother. And he thought, okay, who? Because he had like 12 brothers or something like that. And it was his brother who had been fighting for the guerrilla during the war, and he had permission to be relieved from his duties during the 2-hour session of the football game just to go to see his brother play. Then he was shot again. He was shot during the war. So it tells you how football was important during those years.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was. And obviously, as you said, you lived through that time, incredibly traumatic time, incredibly violent time for everyone involved.
Rodrigo has to speak speakingly about the semifinal against León, against Águila. You have to speak about that because, I don't want to get into too deep details because I want to hear it from you, but that series. I mean, Águila, going back to that Champions Cup series, they were successful in Central America. They reached the semifinal. They were playing against a Mexican club, León. What happened those two games?
Well, Águila played well during the tournament. They went through the group stage. Then they trashed Diriangén from Nicaragua. And this is the semifinals of the tournament against León. When a Mexican team comes to El Salvador, it's a very special game always. Because the Mexicans are like the best teams in CONCACAF. So when the best teams come here, we want to show them with football or with weapons, mainly with violence. So when León came, Águila knew they're not going to play a beautiful football. They're going to fight. So they played 2 games. First one ended 1-1. And the second one, that game never ended because of the violence between the 2 teams. Of course, we don't have video. We don't have footage about that. We only have photos. And it says that there was big fights during that game. But if you read the Mexican newspaper, they say, the Águila players started to fight. They started to kick us. They started to play dirty. And if you ask the Salvadorian players, they will say the same. The Mexicans started to kick us. They started to fight. So what we really know is that both teams, they didn't get along with each other. Maybe that was 2 teams just trying to outfight the other. And when the violence started to grow, it was not possible to keep playing, and the game was suspended. Then the CONCACAF, take the resolution to repeat the game, but León didn't want to play again. So they declared that Águila was the winner on the table.
It's not too bad. That's obviously that was in the 1977 tournament, and that was when Águila went on to win the entire trophy. Incredible, and I can imagine that the scenes seeing those semi-finals would have been incredible as well. Incredible to be a part of, but also just incredible to see the club make it that far again, especially after all of the unrest and the violence and the war almost 10 years earlier.
Yeah. Beating Mexico team on the pitch and off the pitch was really gratifying for everyone.
Especially off the pitch.
Yeah, off the pitch is gratifying.
Yeah, on the pitch, if you're awarded the forfeit victory, please, you got your berth to the final. That was the main goal, right? To get to the final. But just out of curiosity, I was just always wondered, how come the 2 games were played? I know why the 2 games were played in the semifinals. There's always, costs, travel. I think I may have mentioned this to you, Rory, on other podcasts, especially the U.S. podcast with the club teams traveling. At that time, there weren't like fixture dates, so you had to play when availability of the teams. That's why the tournament, correct, Rodrigo, overlapped from 76 to 77 because there wasn't like a concrete date. But I figured that you had to play the final very soon because you had Robin Hood from Suriname waiting in the wings. And going back to what I said earlier about that in the CONCACAF archives, they only had the first leg 5-1. But a lot of people, and to my surprise, when you helped me do the research, that I didn't know that Suriname won the second leg, 1-0, to force a continuation of the game. There was no, look at that, 5-1, you win the first leg, but then now they lose the second leg. Now there's a continuation. They had to go to overtime. There was no, aggregate at that specific time. So it must have been very weird, right, Rodrigo, for the team having to play an extra time game, knowing that they had won the first leg 5-1.
Yeah, but I think we always look at South America, and I think that was the rule for in the early Copa Libertadores tournaments, when you didn't decide it by who won, because first of all it was by points. If you have 3 points or 2 points, because it was 2 points in those days, and the other game you lost, even though you have 5 goals in the aggregate, it didn't count. You need, first of all, you need to continue to play and see if during the overtime you can decide the game. And that's what happened. When Águila lost the second game 1-0, they had to play 30 more minutes, and they played 30 more minutes, where Águila won with goals of Moises González, Cisco Diaz, and Pele Zapata.
You have to admit, that's a little unfair. That's a little unfair, right? Nowadays, that would be, even back then, that could be unfair. I'm just playing a little devil's advocate, Rodrigo, but the thing is, you have to admit, that is a little unfair that they have to play.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you play 2 legs in another country. For example, 1982 final, Marte from El Salvador played 2 games against Transvaal away, and the 2 games were played, I think, Paramaribo. I don't know, maybe Paramaribo.
Right, they played the 2 legs there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 2 legs there. So it's unfair because Marte would love to play here, one of the finals. They didn't get a chance. So
there's some conflict, because when I spoke to, I don't want to get off the subject, but when I spoke to a few contacts that I have obviously in Suriname, the reason why it was played there is because there was some sort of conflict happening in El Salvador at that time, so they had to play the 2 games.
Yes.
Okay, so all right, so that there wasn't true.
Yeah, but in the early CONCACAF Championship Cup, there was a lot of economic reasons not to play the two game home and away, because it was too expensive. So one of the sides had to pay that price.
Is this CONCACAF Cup 1 the peak of CD Aguila's history and for the supporters?
Yes, of course. That was a specialty for Águila. They most of them were from San Miguel or nearby little towns. And there was just one great Brazilian, who was Pinho, who was the attacking midfielder. They had one central defender from Chile, Horacio Diaz-Luco, and the Brazilian goalkeeper, Ademir Barbosa. You had 3 players who were foreigners, but most of the other players came from San Miguel. So they were great players, a great generation. The coach, Águila's coach, was very important to do that. Conrado Miranda, who was of the first Salvadorians who played outside in other league. He played in Costa Rica in the 1950s. I knew him. He died during the pandemic, but he was a very special guy. Those people who like to unify. He was still in his 80s, and he was the leader of a group of veterans who every week they meet in a coffee shop in San Salvador just to talk about the old times. And he was the leader. He was contacting them, or who was sick. Okay, we're going to help this guy. Conrado was a special guy. Conrado was the coach in the 70s. He was the coach in the 60s. In 67 and 68, he was the Águila's coach. And under his leadership, a couple of Águila players made the debut. Juan José Polillo from 77 team made his first appearance in first division. Moises González, the striker, and Félix Pineda, who was one of the strikers too. And then in 72, the Águila's coach was Juan Francisco Barraza, Cariota, the legendary Juan Francisco Barraza, and he made possible for new young people who started to develop in Águila. Pele Zapata, the great player of Águila, Pele Zapata, Mario Castillo, Cisco Diaz, Tony Regalado, who was a defender. So between these 2 coaches, Conrado Miranda and Barraza, they made that generations clicked, and that generations really developed into a great team. And Águila never have been that popular, never have been that good. I underline this. 2 finals is not common in international level by El Salvador clubs. In the 73 CONCACAF Central America Cup was great. They play a final against Saprissa, and Pino was the star, Zapata was the star. And for Águila, that was one of the great moments playing that fight, even though they lost. But Águila was never been that popular and that beloved. That they were really beloved. Pelé Zapata still is a very beloved person.
Where's the trophy? Águilas must have that trophy in their trophy case somewhere. Don't tell me it's gone.
I'm sure it's somewhere. I'm still trying to figure out where it is. But the thing is, Águila don't have a house. They don't have a clubhouse. So all the trophies, they went to houses of past presidents, former chairmans, and I don't know where the cup is. It's somewhere. I don't know. But I'll try to find it.
Has it? Can you believe that? That could be inside somebody's house or something like that. That's amazing.
Yes, there must be in a basement somewhere. I don't know where, full of dust. Maybe a grandkid from a former chairman. I don't know what it is.
It has 100. Well, you said it's a social club. The 100 years. It's not really the football club, correct? So, I mean, I figured for something commemorating the centennial, year. Why couldn't it be, somebody must have that trophy somewhere, don't you think?
Yeah, but maybe they don't know that's the trophy. Maybe they have it in a basement.
Go to my point, Rory, about how the Champions Cup throughout the years is not what it is, since maybe the 1990s. And Rodrigo can correct me on that. I mean, it has evolved, but it's changed so much of it. It was just maybe it was a tournament that obviously CONCACAF wanted to turn into something similar to the Copa Libertadores. Okay, once it began, but it was like so difficult, as Rodrigo mentioned earlier, and as I said in other podcasts, there was no clear fixture international dates. You had to rely on the teams' respective schedules. Many teams had to withdraw because of economical situations, or sometimes they just cannot play on those dates because they have other league commitments, or sometimes they're on tours, and sometimes that's why you've had so many champions that were crowned without even stepping onto the pitch.
It's amazing to think that this trophy could be sitting in someone's basement. Obviously, it's a great legacy that Águila have left behind. What have their successes been in the modern day? Have they been able to replicate the same success that they had in their golden era?
No. Águila is in decline. Águila have been in decline in the last maybe 20 years. The Civil War was a big part of the decline. And I tell you, because everybody maybe have other explanation, but to me, before the war, in the 60s and 70s, El Salvador was another country, because the war make you less generous, make you less, you don't trust someone, maybe you're not that clean image of your neighbor or your friend or of people that you know of your community. And I think football suffer from that. And if in the 60s and 70s, you have these San Miguel millionaires or landowners or coffee plantations owners, okay, we're going to support Águila because it's us, because it's our town. Now they're not that. The war made us less aware of our outside bubble. We live in bubbles. We live in houses trying not to be damaged because of what happens outside. So I think we became less a community. We're not that community with that unified where everyone is mind his own business. So I think Águila suffered from that. And people who finance Águila, because there are people who finance Águila, they have not really get that spirit from the 60s and 70s, where Águila was the team of the people. And the players from all over Western El Salvador formed Águila, and they were passionate about it. And they have never recovered that spirit. And Águila still is good. I mean, they still win championship, but they have won 3 championships in the last 15 years. And they were isolated team. It's not like a team that has been developed in 5 years or have players who really identify with Águila. They've been like forgotten championships. But I think Águila still has a lot of people who loves the club. I think Águila is still a symbol of Western El Salvador. But the owners and the people who run Águila have not rediscovered that identity. They're still trying to find it, and it's not the same.
Yeah. One thing that I did actually want to, and I mean, don't get me wrong, it's completely understandable, and I get what you're saying, that, you know, you see this all over the world where a footballing nation will almost behave in a certain way until a civil war happens, and then it almost turns its people against each other. It becomes a lot more divided, and football changes as a result of that. And obviously, following the civil war, following Águila's legacy that they've left behind, you know, the supporter culture must have suffered as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the supporter culture of Águila? How do they express themselves on the terraces? What's it like in the modern day?
Yeah, that's another subject. And I think, well, that had nothing to do with war. I think in Salvador happened another phenomenon, another thing during the 1990s. Our Argentinian South American players came and they're like, showed the fans how to behave. And they, you know what barra brava means? The barra brava from the yes, radical, the hooligans from Argentina. They have some good things because they're colorful, they sing, but then the violence started to develop. And the violence between hooligans, a group of hooligans, became insufferable. Águila became a team where you don't see many families in the terraces.
Okay, I understand.
Águila as a club, they have to be loved again the way it was. But mostly they have to demonstrate the people that the terraces and the stadium is a safe place to be. Because some people, they have to fall in love with Águila again. I think they're still loved, but not in a passionate way that it used to be. Now you see Águila games and you see empty seats all over the place. Maybe if they go to the final, they appear, but most of the time, I think it's a sleeping giant, Águila. They can become great again, but they had to make a lot of changes to reach that level again.
Sleeping giant's a good way of putting it. Would you say that at the moment they're a club with something to prove?
Yes, because they are still a subject. As I tell you, when I live in the US, I have co-workers. We always talk about Águila on Monday. Okay, who's the new player? Who's the new Argentinian or the new Uruguayan or the new Colombian? And who's going to coach? This coach, they suck. They have to fire him. I mean, Águila is still a beloved team. But the connection between the club and the fans, it needs to be fixed.
That's interesting. Really fascinating, particularly when you have a club that is representatives of such a distinct group of people with their own regional identity within a nation. It's interesting to know that the club are kind of battling to connect with them and really seeking to reconnect with them. It's a fascinating story. And what do you think the next 5-10 years holds for Águila? Is there any way out of this for them at the moment, or does it look like they're still kind of going down the same slippery slope?
Well, I don't know. I think I see uncertainty. I think they want to be great because, as I tell you, they are still beloved. Águila is still maybe one of the most beloved teams here. Maybe the most beloved, I don't know. But I think they have been lacking leadership, the correct leadership. All the presidents, they think, been in the wrong direction for many years. They need a new leadership. Maybe, I hope so. Because it's a great town. As Western El Salvador is great. The people, I love them. My mother is from West El Salvador. Half my family is from Águila. Yeah, I hope they do well because West El Salvador is a very special place. I think I like them most than East El Salvador. I think that, yes, my mother's family, They're family oriented. They're friendly. When I talk to my cousins, I think there's a special connection. When my mother talks to her cousins, they're very loving people, and they need a club to be respected and to be loved again.
I'm with you. It's really interesting, really fascinating. Steven, just one last thing before we finished up. Obviously, as you mentioned, and as we spoke about in this episode, Águila featured in the CONCACAF Champions Cup episode that we done, and the piece that was around them as well. Obviously, you research the soccer from every nation in CONCACAF just through your work with ANCCIF. Is there anything that stuck out for you in terms of football in El Salvador that makes it stand out when you're doing your research, or has it been as difficult as everywhere else to find information for football clubs, especially before you take into account things like conflict, things like economic issues, etc.?
I mean, I'll speak in general in the sense that when you're trying to piece together a puzzle, you're going to have to find the right pieces. And specifically in, I would have to say, El Salvador has been, with the help, obviously, not just, Rodrigo Arias, obviously a recently new member of ANCCIF, and, very welcoming for him to join our association. I've known Rodrigo for many years, especially during my time of CONCACAF. And he, along with other, historians that are from that region, it made things very, very, less complicated to get details because their history is so intact. You just have to find the right people and the right information. It's good to say that, there hasn't been any difficulty getting details, let it be national team or club, from El Salvador and among other countries within the Central American region. There are other parts where there's a mystery that we need to find the right people. Going back to ANCCIF, that's our point. We want to find, members of each and every one of the associations, countries, because everyone has a story to tell. As you said many times in your podcast, there is a story to tell. So there are a lot of details that you can find. Hey, listen, you can tell your story, not just in the podcast, but in an article itself. So Rodrigo has been a very key component, at least in my research, both in ANCCIF and outside ANCCIF, for any information of El Salvador. I do commend him and I thank him for all of his assistance, and vice versa. Anytime that he needs information that I'm able to provide, it's always, give and take. That's the main thing. And our key thing is to get the right information. Goes back to what I said earlier. Many years, CONCACAF had just one game for this 76-77 final. And it was so ironic. And if it was just a simple conversation between Rodrigo and I, and he said, Steve, there was a second game. And I go, really? Please give me the details. Let's find it. And I was so amazed that these details were hidden in a closet or were not even publicized elsewhere. And how, the key thing, that's what we are. We are an association that we want to disseminate the right information. And that's what we, plan to do. And hopefully we can continue with people like Rodrigo Arias joining in to already a good group of historians that are still part of ANCCIF.
It's a really good point you've made there, though, Steven, because obviously I was delighted when you got in touch to say Rodrigo was interested in doing a podcast on Águila because, as I said, football in El Salvador is something that just does not appear on the radars of many European or UK-based football fans. So it was a learning exercise for me to be able to hear about the club, hear about the story, do the research, etc. But obviously Águila are one of the most successful clubs in El Salvador. And what makes the work of ANCCIF and yourselves so important is that you're digging into these stories at every single football club and every single level of the game, which is just as important because there are so many other clubs, so many other stories that we don't know about. And just equating it to football in Scotland as well, looking into our early football clubs, what for me makes the research worth it is being able to tie those early football clubs back to things like place in the modern day. How did our places get their names? How did these clubs get their identities? Where did they come from? And I think that's what makes research like this so important, is that you're piecing together what is the truth at the end of the day. And every single time you find some new information, it's a new breakthrough that you've made within your research, you know.
You just found a treasure. Oh my God, it's fantastic. I mean, just recently, those photos I sent you for that series that you were speaking of earlier in the podcast between Transvaal and Atletico Marte that took place in Transvaal. I mean, thanks to another, ANCCIF member, Desney Romero from Suriname, was able to provide me those images and, what did I do? I had to share them with the historians I know from El Salvador. And you have to admit that had to have been a treasure for you, Rodrigo, right?
They are. I'm always looking for treasures like that.
That makes our job a lot easier.
Exactly. You're absolutely spot on. Guys, this has been a fantastic conversation tonight. Thank you very much for joining me. Is there anything that you would like to add, Rodrigo, Steven, just before we finish up?
Well, it's just been a pleasure to talk to you guys, and maybe I'm more motivated to go and reach or search for that trophy. Maybe I'll try to interview more former owners or former presidents or former chairmen.
Find a photo of that trophy. Yes, if you can find a photo of that trophy, that'd be great.
I have a photo of the trophy. Well, it's not mine, it's from La Prensa Gráfica, but going to publish. I promise you, La Prensa is going to publish it, and we're going to see what that trophy look like.
Yeah, if you could find out who has it, that's even better.
Yes. Yeah, but I have a photo to look for.
That's good. Well, I mean, on my end, Rory, it's been obviously it's a pleasure. Once again, Rodrigo Arias is a great addition to ANCCIF. I'm very happy that he's part of our membership group. And like I said, we're moving along. We've got our website of anccif.org. We're very proud to also be partnering with you guys at Football Heritage, and anything that you guys need. Obviously, our door is always open, vice versa, I'm sure, to that extent. But always thanking you for having the opportunity to do this podcast.
Not at all. It's always a pleasure being able to speak with you, Steven. And, obviously the partnership that we've had with ANCCIF has been brilliant, not just from a perspective of the content that we've put out, but in terms of networking, the stories that we've told, the people that we've met. So I can't thank you guys enough for being so accommodating through this partnership with the type of knowledge that you've brought. Rodrigo, thank you very much for joining us this evening as well. If any of our listeners have any questions about this episode, if they want to suggest a topic themselves, then please do get in touch. Thank you very much once again for tuning in. Remember, you can also subscribe to our exclusive Patreon feed for £3 a month if you're looking for that additional podcast per week as well. This has been episode number 109. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.